So we're starting section 2 of chapter 1. So the title is Physical Signification of Technical Form Taking. And then the initial subsection of that section is Physical Conditions of Technical Form Taking. So we're still talking about the brick example, what it means for the hylomorphic schema. So I'll start reading. Nevertheless, if the psychosocial conditioning of thought can explain the vicissitudes of the hylomorphic schema, the former can hardly explain the permanence of the latter and its universality in reflection. This permanence throughout successive aspects and this universality that infinitely spans various domains seem to require a less easily modifiable foundation than social life. This discovery of this unconditional foundation requires the physical analysis of the conditions of possibility of form-taking. Form-taking itself requires matter, form, and energy, and singularity. But for a raw matter and a pure form to be able to divide into two technical half-chains that will be rejoined by the grasping of singular information, it is necessary that raw matter already contain, before any elaboration, something that can forge a system leading to the terminal point of the half-chain whose origin is pure form. This condition must be before any sort of human elaboration. Matter must be structured in a certain way for it to already have the properties that are the condition of form-taking. In a certain sense, we could say that matter contains the coherence of form before form-taking, yet this coherence is already a configuration with the function of form. Technical form-taking we call the Hyxidity of Raw Matter. A tree trunk on the timber yard consists of abstract raw matter insofar as it is considered a volume of wood to be used. Only the essence to which it belongs approximates the concrete by indicating that a certain behavior of matter will be encountered at the moment of form-taking. A pine tree trunk is not a fir tree trunk. But this aforementioned tree, this trunk, has a hyxidity in its totality in each of its parts, right up to a definite level of smallness. There is a hyxidity in its totality in the sense in which the tree trunk is straight or curved, almost cylindrical or regularly conical, sectioned off more or less roundly or in a strictly flattened manner. This hyxidity of the ensemble is truly how this trunk is distinguished from all others. It is not merely how the tree can be recognized perceptively, but what is technically a principle of choice when the tree is utilized in its totality. For example, in order to make a beam, this trunk is more suitable than another depending on the situation due to its particular features, which are already features of form, specifically a form worthy of the carpenter's technique, even though this form is presented by matter. A tree in the forest can be recognized by looking for the trunk best situated to a certain precise usage. The carpenter merely needs to go into the forest. So this is one of those giant multi-page paragraphs, so I'll stop there and we can discuss that first page. So here he's continuing with the development of the last section, and so he had posed the problem earlier of so he had set out the problem of what for the generality of the hylomorphic schema, or why is it that the hylomorphic schema seems to be, why is it that the hylomorphic schema maintains its hold on thought over a variety of different eras from classical antiquity up to the present. And so there's that social embedding, or that social production of the hylomorphic schema, in the sense that it corresponds to the slave owner's perspective on the person who orders a certain number of bricks to be made out of a mass of clay, but doesn't have any knowledge or interest in the actual production process itself. But then if we want to account for that generality, then we have to understand how this schema can operate in other types of societies rather than just in slave-owning society. It is not tied to that particular social arrangement that allows for the generality of the schema, or the fact that it still maintains some sort of validity in contemporary society. And so that's what he's going to be trying to set out in this section, is that the physical basis, so not tied to the social basis, or the hylomorphic schema. So the first sort of example that he's drawing from for the the physical basis of the hylomorphic schema is wood, the form of wood. So if wood, we can treat it as a raw matter to which a form is going to be applied through various woodworking operations. But a tree trunk as is not pure matter. It's not something that has just an abstract form. It's the trunk has a general shape, whether it's cylindrical or conical or whatever it is. As we'll see in the next bit, it also has internal structure, which makes certain woodworking operations more easier or more difficult to perform. We'll see in the next bit, but in general, this has to do with the capacity of a certain form to take on a certain form, which is not always equal depending on what type of matter and what type of form are in question.
Quick question. In terms of terminology, as we've run into this a number of times, I just wanted to get some opinions or clarification on the use of the terms half chains, like two half chains. I've been kind of rereading that as some sort of interactive processes, or I'm just wondering about ways of thinking about what he may be referring to when he says two half chains.
Right. So this goes back to the previous section and the analysis of the hylomorphic schema and the interaction of form and matter. So rather than just saying that there's an abstract form and a raw matter that are sort of added to each other in some sense, there has to be some operations that will take the abstract form and sort of incarnate it into a real physical object, a mold in a particular case. And then on the other hand, the raw matter is not just an intellectual matter. It's something that has to be prepared in a particular manner, whether it's clay or wood or whatever it is. It has to be prepared so that it can take on the form from the other side. So you have one half chain that starts from raw matter and then proceeds to through the preparation towards the form taking operation, and then you have the other half chain that starts from the abstract form and then proceeds through the physical embodiment of that form in a mold or other tools or something like that towards that form taking operation. And so the form taking operation is the point where those two half chains link up.
I was just going to say this section reminds me of the quote from pages 24, 25, where he says that it could be said that the form of the mold only operates on the form of the clay and not the clay matter. That this whole interaction of like the limiting form of the artisan and the tools that they use, and then the implicit form that allows form taking to even take place in the first place. It's an interesting turn, and I think we'll see more of that in the coming pages.
Yeah, so we're going to see more about, so in the case of the brick, the matter is relatively plastic in the sense that it can take on just about any form that you want to give it. You can produce a mold of pretty much any form and fill it with clay and then make a brick or a block of whatever shape you want. But then when you look at other types of matter, so in this case wood, there's much more internal structure to it, which will require that the form taking operation be more, that there are only certain types of form taking operation are possible, or some are easier or harder than others. Yeah, I guess I'll try turning off the live stream and see if so hopefully everyone should be able to speak in the voice channel if they so desire, and you can also put commentaries in the chat. But yeah, did you have a comment you wanted to make, Sol Hashemi?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think one really cool thing about, I was just thinking about the half chain as we were kind of going into that, and that, the link, so the fact that there's two half chains and then there's the link that then just becomes part of the chain. There's no difference really between it once you link up the two halves, and then the two half chains in the link become then like possibly a half chain in another operation. So I think that's an interesting how the half chain then continues, becomes a chain, and then becomes a half chain later.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be anything that would prevent some sort of iteration of this chain process that you could have forms imposed on something that previously was acting as a form to another matter. So you can continue imposing more forms or bringing out more forms onto sort of higher and higher levels. I think that's something that's still open in Simonel's account.
Shall we read the next section, and I'll offer to read it if so? Okay, secondly, the existence of implicit forms becomes manifest the moment when the craftsman works on the raw matter. A second level of hexaity manifests therein. A trunk quartered or stripped by a circular saw leaves behind two regular beams, but these are less solid than those from the same trunk broken into wedges. However, the 4 blocks of wood are seemingly equal, despite the quartering procedure utilized. But the difference consists in how the mechanical saw cuts the wood abstractly along a geometrical plane, without respecting the slack undulations of the fiber or their expansively spiral winding. The saw cuts the fibers, whereas the wedge separates them merely into 2 halves. The crack proceeds by respecting the continuity of the fibers, curving around a knot, following the heart of the tree, and guided by the implicit form that the force of the wedges reveals. Similarly, a lathe tree fragment requires a revolving geometrical form from this operation. But the lathing cuts a certain amount of the fibers, such that the figure's geometrical envelopment acquired through revolution cannot coincide with the sectioning of the fibers. The true implicit forms are not geometrical but topological. The technical labor must respect these topological forms that constitute a parceled hexaity, a possible information without anything lacking. The extreme fragility of unrolled wood, which prevents their usage in a single non-laminated layer, results from the fact that this procedure, which combines linear sawing and lathing, veritably yields a sheet of wood but without respecting the orientation of the fibers above a sufficient length. In this case, the explicit form produced by the technical operation does not respect the implicit form. Knowing how to use a tool is come to man through the tool, the implicit form of the matter being worked upon at the precise spot that the tool attacks. The plane is not merely what cuts out a more or less thick chip, it is also what makes it possible to feel if the chip is cut out finely without splinters, or even if it begins to be uneven, which signifies that the orientation of the lines of the wood is opposed by the movement of the hand. What makes certain simple tools simpler, like the draw knife, which does excellent work, is that, due to their non-automaticity and the non-geometrical character of their movement, which is entirely supported by the hand and not by an external system of reference, like the lathe, these tools allow for us to grasp continuous and precise signals that invite us to follow the implicit forms of workable matter. The mechanical saw and the lathe violate the wood and misrecognize it. This feature of the technical operation, what could be called the conflict of levels of forms, reduces the possible number of raw materials that can be used to produce an object. All wood can be worked with a draw knife. Some types of wood are already difficult to polish, but very few types of wood are suitable for the lathe, a machine which chips away along an orientation that does not account for the wood's implicit form, the particular hexaity of each part. Some types of wood that would be excellent for cutting tools, which can be oriented and modified during the labor process, become unusable for the lathe, which irregularly attacks them and gives them a rough, spongy surface by detaching bundles of fibers.
Right, so here we have an analysis of 2 different ways of imposing form onto wood. So you can either operate at the level of the structure of the wood itself, of its fibers and so on, by splitting, or conversely, you can operate at the level of the general form or the shape of the whole piece of wood by with lathing or similar types of operations which don't apply to the structures in the within the wood. So the one method stays at the level of the structure of the wood, and the other one is at the level of is a higher order of magnitude and doesn't respect the structures of the wood itself.
So both the draw knife and the lathe are at a higher order of magnitude, right?
Yes, I think so. I'm just trying to find that draw knife example where I'm not a carpenter or anything, so my knowledge of this stuff is basically drawn from Simondo. But yeah, I think so.
So I've done a bit of woodworking. So a draw knife, it's basically like a strip of like a knife that's kind of long, like maybe a foot, wide. It can be shorter or longer, but then there's two handles, and so one would place like a piece of wood in a vise or some kind of clamp, and then you would use the draw knife to go along with the grain to kind of remove wood. It's kind of like a chisel, but this like long strip that has handles, and it is like a very different interaction with wood than using a mechanical saw or an electric lathe, because of I think like this is right on what he's saying. It's like such a different experience, the like how one is responding to the wood and able to shift kind of continuously as one is making these drawing the knife and removing wood.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that. It's good to
I
have
have a
someone with real
question, though.
experience of this. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so given the example there of the visual example, the picture of the of the draw knife, it seems like it, slightly constrained to more planar type of cutting away, but maybe Sol can address the idea of, but whether there is a constraint towards more planar type movements of cuts, or whether there is more flexibility as far as
Yeah, so there's different styles of draw knives. There's some that are designed for making flatter cuts, and there's some that are more curved. And even if one is flat, it's pretty easy just to turn an object to make it round. It's not going to have. So I mean, I think lathes were used historically as well, but were like foot operated or had a little bit more like human kind of like feedback in their operation. But that's something to think about too. But I think the draw knife, you could easily make something round with it, with a certain type of draw knife.
Sorry, I was just going to point to the two footnotes that you posted in the chat, Alyosha, which I think are important here, because so as Lathe Mason pointed to, so the draw knife or even a foot operated lathe or any other tool that you have that is operated by human muscular power, you have at the same time as the human gives the motion to the tool and the power that operates the tool, they're also receiving feedback from the application of the tool to whatever matter is being worked upon. So in this case, wood, and so that feedback is what allows for that more guided operation. So whereas the lathe, the electric lathe, it just operates at a certain speed, and it sort of ignores the information contained in the wood, the singularities of the structure of the wood. Whereas the human operator with a draw knife or other similar tools can feel the way that the tool is cutting into the wood and follow the grain and the structure of the wood. So there's this information contained in the wood that guides the form taking process. And as he points out in footnote 11, these singularities are the result of the growth of the tree. So they sort of represent or correspond to the action of wind or animals or whatever other forces operated on the tree in its growth that made the grain form in a certain way, and it's those singularities that are picked up on by the feedback in the human operated tool.
Yeah, and in that footnote 12, I think it's interesting because he's almost flipping it, and he's saying the forms are almost their activities modulated by the information. So it's not just, I guess, like how we would think of it of looking at it and noticing these inconsistencies, and you're choosing to move around them or something like that. It's that they actually affect the whole shape and kind of create limit points and breaks where things are possible. And I guess he'll go into more examples of filters and other things where there's no like sort of perfect filter that you can start with, that you're always already making a pre-selection based on. I was trying to say in chat, it seems like he's done a few. So he says there's 3 degrees in this like really long set of paragraphs. First is some kind of the totality of the hexady of the thing as it's going to be used and like selected at all. On page 37, he says technically a principle of choice when the tree is utilized in its totality. Then you have the second level manifests when the craftsman begins to work on the raw matter, page 38, and then he'll get into the 3rd degree, I think, later on. But the point is that these degrees, like, they don't come about just because of some kind of rational choice making, but are implicit at different levels in the in the matter itself, I guess.
Yeah. So the matter has this structure that only appears in connection with its use or it's being worked on. So the tree trunk as a whole has a certain structure which corresponds to the choice of whether you need a cylindrical or a conical piece of wood for whatever use you're putting it to, and then the structure, the fine level structure, the grain of the wood appears in connection with the woodworking operation and the splitting and using the draw knife and so on. And then we'll get to that next layer below, which only makes itself known in another form of technical operation. So the level at which the form taking takes place is relative to the type of technical operation that is being carried out. Okay, so I think we can go on to the next page or so. I think it continues with the same giant paragraph.
I can go. The only types of wood suitable for the lathe are fine-grained or almost homogeneously grained, with a system of fibers mirrored by a system of transversal or oblique bonds between bundles. However, these types of wood, which have a non-oriented structure, are not necessarily the ones that offer the greatest resistance and the greatest elasticity to bending forces. Wood treated by the lathe loses the benefits of its implicit information. It presents no advantage over a homogeneous matter, like a malleable mold matter. On the contrary, its implicit form runs the risk of conflicting with the explicit form one wants to give it, thereby frustrating the agent of the technical operation. Finally, at the 3rd degree, there is an elementary hexady of workable matter that intervenes absolutely in the elaboration by imposing implicit forms, which are limits that cannot be surpassed. This is not matter as an inert reality, but matter that harbors implicit forms imposing preliminary limits to the technical operation. In wood, this elementary limit is the cell, or sometimes the differentiated mass of cells, if the differentiation is fairly extensive. Thus, a vesicle, which is the result of a cellular differentiation, is a formal limit that cannot be surpassed. A wooden object cannot be constructed if the wood's details would have an order of magnitude inferior to that of the cells or the masses of differentiated cells when they exist. For example, if we wanted to construct a filter made of a thin laminate of wood pierced with holes, we could not make holes smaller than the grooves already found in the wood naturally formed. The only forms that can be imposed by the technical operation are those of an order of magnitude superior to the elementary implicit forms of the matter utilized. The discontinuity of matter intervenes as form, and what happens at the level of the element happens at the level of the hexady of the ensembles. The carpenter looks in the forest for a tree with the desired form because he cannot significantly straighten or curve a tree, and he must guide himself towards spontaneous forms. Similarly, the chemist or bacteriologist who would like a filter of wood or earth will be unable to pierce a slab of wood or clay. He will choose a fragment of wood or slab of clay whose natural pores have the dimensions he desires. The elementary hexaity intervenes in this choice. No two porous slabs of wood are exactly alike because each pore exists in itself. One cannot be certain of the caliber of a filter except after trying it out, because the pores are the result of a form taking elaborated before the technical operation. The technical operation, which is an operation of modeling, molding, and sawing, functionally adapts the support of these elementary implicit forms, but does not create the elementary implicit forms. One must cut wood perpendicularly to the fiber in order to have porous wood, whereas one must cut it longitudinally, parallel to the fibers, in order to have elastic and resistant wood. These exact implicit forms, i.e. the fibers, can be utilized either as pores by transversal section or as resistant elastic structures by longitudinal section.
So I don't know if it's just me hung up on this, but these 3 degrees that he's describing, like I'm having trouble distinguishing between them. So they kind of make sense to me, but this 3rd degree sounds quite similar to the second one he described. So I'm trying to understand what's different with where is it? In the second one, he says it manifests when the craftsman begins to work on the raw matter. That makes sense to me. But then isn't what they're doing inherently limited by? Is he just saying this? Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking. Does anyone help explain what he means by these different kinds of hexaity?
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think the 3 levels or 3 orders that he's talking about here are not. There isn't like a sort of pre-existing structure of these 3 orders. It's just they're somewhat arbitrary, or they're relative to the case of the wood, and other types of matter would have maybe 2 or 1 or 10 or whatever degrees of Hyxidity that could be identified. So in this case, there's these 3 degrees you can identify because you have the shape of the entire piece of wood, the trunk or whatever it is, and then you have the level of the grain of the wood, which can be identified through woodworking operation and the feedback that it provides. And then you have the elementary level or the lowest level below which you can't go with the level of the cell or the differentiated bundle of cells. So I think these 3 levels are relative to the type of material chosen or the type of matter chosen, and also to the types of operations that operate on that matter. So if there were other levels of operation for woodworking, then you might have more levels of Hyxidity that would correspond to them.
Yeah, maybe it's something to think about. I guess I kind of implicitly, I suppose everything with Simonin is always going to be processual. So it's not that I was concerned that they might be preformed. It's more, I guess, and we're kind of saying in the chat, it might help me a little bit, this thing of, isn't it just a kind of perspectival shift between the second and the third? Because the craftsman manifesting this like new kind of added on hexaity. I think he gets onto it in the end of like everything that the artisan does with this specific thing is beginning to kind of add and renew the hexaity. So that makes sense. But then if you're talking about the elementary hexaity, that that one is only happening because of the limit set. But if it's just a perspective thing of, like we said with the information, where it's almost as though the information is the thing that is now setting the limits on the artisan rather than the other way around. Maybe that's why it's necessary for him to even distinguish between them. But I'll keep trying to think about it.
Just one quick comment. I was going to say my only reservation about the term perspectival is that it's not these degrees of Hyxidity are not relative to a perceiver or something along those lines. They're relative to an operation, a technical operation. So it's each type of technical operation of imposing a form or taking on a form of this matter will have its level of Hyxidity relative to it.
So I'm trying to piece together a few concepts, and I'm reminded a little bit of some of the reading from the other book on the mode of technical objects, the mode of the existence of technical objects. And I'm thinking that here Simondon is kind of touching into maybe the aesthetic experience of the craftsman and the processes whereby the technical object is involved in this interaction of information, such that it also informs the aesthetic experience, both of the becoming subject and the interplay with the matter. In the case of wood here, and the malleability, the flexibility, or the hexady, I guess, of this particular matter, wood in question. I mean, he goes on to talk about other matter, but it seems like there's some kind of speculation on the aesthetic experience that involves these different degrees of being informed, and he seems to have a commitment to the idea that the matter's hexady kind of speaks to the aesthetic that might involve, I don't know if it's identity, but something having to do with the formation of the subject, the subjective aspects of working with production of the technical object.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the term aesthetic here, because the aesthetic mode of existence, or aesthetic reality, is one of the particular forms that he particular modes of being in the world that he sets out in that third part of on the mode of existence of technical objects. So it has a sort of a specific place in the philosophical system, which I don't think directly applies here, but it's definitely something. There's that experiential aspect that you're, I think, pointing to, so that the relationship between the artisan and the matter that they work upon is not. It's different than the relationship between the slave owner and the matter that they order for to be worked on. So there's this experiential aspect which is different in this case rather than in the case of the slave owner. Oh, and 61 also pointed out, I'd forgotten about this, but this is probably relevant, but pointed out in the chat that the Greek term hule, which is the sort of technical philosophical term for matter, the like everyday usage of the term means wood. So the term that came to be the technical philosophical term for matter, what originally meant wood, and so wood is in some sense like the paradigm case of matter. So that's a nice little example, or it's relevant to the development here in this section.
That was helpful. I'm not sure about the the terminology or the discussion around the production where he does talk about slave, and then I guess the analogous or the transformation that happens later. I'm not clear on that part of the discourse. I wasn't sure. Is that something that's in reference to? Does he bring that up in this reading and in the ILFI, or is that something in the other book? Because I do remember reading something about that. But my other question is more kind of on the surface, marginal. Which book was written first? Were they written at the same time? Did ILFI come before the mode of existence of technical objects?
I'm not 100% sure about the writing history because so in the French university system at the time in like the late 50s and early 60s when he's writing this, you had to present two theses, a major thesis and a minor thesis. And so this book, the Individuation book, was the major thesis, and the Technical Objects book was the minor thesis. But in terms of publication, On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects was published first in 1958, I believe. And then this one came out in 1960, I think. The first part of this of the Individuation book came out in 1960, a couple years later. So the writing, I'm not 100% sure. I think they were probably being written at the same time. But in terms of publication, the Technical Objects book was published first. We're at the end of that one giant paragraph. So we ended at as resistant elastic structures by longitudinal section.
I can read that next paragraph on page 40.
Sure, sounds good.
It could be said that the technical examples are still plagued by a certain zoomorphic relativism when the implicit forms are solely distinguished with respect to the use that can be made of them. Yet it should be noted that scientific instrumentation appeals to implicit forms in a completely similar way. The discovery that crystals can diffract X-rays and also gamma rays has objectively founded the existence of the implicit forms of raw matter, wherein sensory intuition could grasp nothing but a homogeneous continuum. Molecular lattices act like a network that has been traced by hand on a slab of metal. But this natural network has an even greater elementary lattice that is much smaller than the finest networks that can be fabricated, even with microtools. Thus, at the extremity of the scale of magnitudes, the physicist acts like the carpenter who goes out to look for a suitable tree in the forest. The physicist chooses to analyze the X-rays of a certain wavelength of the crystal that forms a network with an elementary lattice of the same order of magnitude as this wavelength. And the crystal will be cut according to a certain axis so that one can best use this natural network it forms, or it will be assaulted by the bundle of rays according to the best direction. Science and techniques are no longer distinguished at the level of utilization of implicit forms. These forms are objective and can be studied by science, just as they can be used by techniques. Furthermore, the only means that science has to study them inductively is to implicate them in an operation that reveals them. Given an unknown crystal, we can discover its elementary lattice by sending out bundles of X-rays or gamma rays with a known wavelength onto it in order to be able to observe the figures of diffraction. The technical operation and the scientific operation are joined together in the operative model they instigate.
Right. So here we see that the implicit forms that he's been discussing are not solely relative to usage that they can be put to in technical operations, but that they can also these implicit forms are also at work in scientific instruments, and so they don't have a usage in the same sense that they did in a technical operation, but it's the same selection of matter that has the appropriate implicit forms that is at work. And so in the case of the crystals, I mean, I think he explains it fairly clearly here, but just to set it out, with crystals, crystals have a geometrical structure depending on the chemical nature of the substance that is crystallized. So every substance has a particular geometrical structure which repeats in a network or lattice structure, and you can analyze the structure by bombarding it with X-rays, which are diffracted in a certain pattern depending on the structure of the crystal. So you can take an unknown crystal, you don't know what it's made out of, what the chemical composition is, and then you can bombard it with X-rays of a known frequency and study the diffraction patterns, and that will tell you what the lattice structure of the crystal is, and then from that you can tell what the chemical composition of that of the material is. So it's and then you can also work the other way around. You could take a known crystal, a crystal whose chemical composition and lattice structure is known, and then you could test an unknown beam of X-rays, and based on the diffraction pattern, you could determine what the frequency of the X-rays is. So you can work in either direction, but in either case, you're relying on these implicit forms within the crystal to diffract in a certain pattern, and you're drawing information from those implicit forms. Okay, so I think we can go on to the next section or subsection, I suppose. So here we're going to talk about what relation these implicit forms have to what we think of as qualities of matter, or qualities of entities. So I can read the next couple paragraphs. The hylomorphic schema is insufficient to the extent that it does not account for implicit forms, since it distinguishes between the pure form, which is called form, and the implicit form, which is conflated with other features of matter under the name quality. In fact, quite a large number of qualities attributed to matter are in fact implicit forms, and this confusion does not merely imply an imprecise classification. It also conceals an error. Veritable qualities do not possess Hyxidity, whereas implicit forms contain a Hyxidity to the highest extent. Porosity is merely a global quality that a piece of earth or wood could lose or gain without a relation of inherence to the matter that constitutes it. Porosity is the aspect under which the functionality of all of these elementary implicit forms, which include the pores of wood, such as they in fact exist, present themselves to the order of magnitude of human manipulation. Pores become dilated or condensed, obstructed or cleared. Implicit form is real and exists objectively. Quality often results from the choice that the technical elaboration makes concerning implicit forms. The same wood will be permeable or impermeable according to the manner in which it has been cut, whether perpendicular or parallel to the fibers. When it is used to describe or characterize a type of matter, quality just ends up as an approximate, somewhat statistical knowledge. The essential porosity of a tree is the greater or lesser chance one has to encounter a certain number of non-obstructed vesicles per square centimeter. Quite a few qualities, particularly those relative to superficial states like smoothness, granulation, polish, coarseness, and softness, designate statistically predictable implicit forms. This qualification is merely a global evaluation linked to the magnitude of a certain implicit form generally presented by a certain matter. Descartes put a lot of effort into reducing qualities to elementary structures because he did not dissociate matter and form, and because he considered matter as capable of essentially conveying forms to all levels of magnitudes, not only to the level of extreme smallness of the corpuscles of subtle matter, but also to the level of the primordial vortices from which our galaxies emerged. The vortices of subtle matter, which constitute light or transmit magnetic forces, are on the small scale what cosmic vortices are on the large scale. The form is not attached to a determinate order of magnitude, like the technical elaboration would lead us to believe. Insofar as the latter reduces to qualities of matter all the forms that constitute this matter as an already structured being before any elaboration. So when we talk about the qualities of matter, in this case, things like permeability or impermeability to water, this is a sort of a statistical statement, I guess you could say. So you're attributing to the matter a certain likelihood of finding vesicles in a certain direction or something like that. And this is also relative to the way that the matter is treated, as he mentions that it depends on the way that the wood is cut, whether it would be porous, permeable, or impermeable. He then compares this to Descartes' system of philosophy or physics. So in this system, in his system, there was he distinguishes between primary qualities and secondary qualities. So primary qualities are geometrical ones, and those are the only real ones. And secondary qualities are relative to an observer, so they have to do with the effect of the primary qualities on the observer. And he explicitly tries to explain the generation of these secondary qualities through different operations of vortices like sort of primary matter. So that there's no in Descartes' system, there's no void. There's no atoms or void. It's a continuum of matter, but there are sort of elementary small bits of matter, I guess you could say, that circulate in these vortices. And the phenomena of magnetism or light or gravity and so on, these are all explained in terms of different forms of vortices. And the world system as a whole, or the solar system, is itself the result of a vortex that coagulates in a certain form, and so on. So in Descartes' system, there's a reduction of qualities, so heat and light and color and so on, to the operation of these elementary structures. So yeah, that's sort of the background of that second paragraph there.
Can I ask if this applies? This is my question sort of in chat, or my supposition, that this could almost apply like that last sentence of the first paragraph where he's saying quality results from the choice technical elaboration makes concerning implicit forms. The same wood will be permeable or impermeable according to the manner in which it has been cut. It strikes me like, does Simondon talk elsewhere or later in this about I guess prior to the technical operation? Because this almost seems like a great way of rebutting the arguments about qualia just in general, that like this also would happen even in nature, even though a technical operation isn't intervening in the same intentional way that you might say with a human, just in like a whole ecosystem, whether you're talking about different plants and the wind and erosion and all that stuff, or if you include like animal behavior, whatever it might be, that the qualia that normally are kind of abstractly attributed to a thing of like, oh, it's smell, it's color, these things, like, would it make sense within Simondon's framework to say, well, this is all information, and information in the sense that it is only exists sort of as the result, even temporary result, of all these other processes that are happening, that are acting upon each other, upon the form taking, the limits within these things, the different levels of hexady, I suppose, to produce this particular tree that has these qualia which appear to just be sort of inherent in it, rather than being the results of something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The one element that I would want to emphasize as well, though, is that the qualities that he's talking about in this section, as he puts it, they're statistical or approximate. So they because you're almost zooming out from the detailed structure, so that you only get a quality like roughness or smoothness insofar as you're operating at a level of an order of magnitude that's much greater than the fine structure of the surface, so that so smoothness or roughness is something like the probability of coming across a certain number of bumps in a surface over per square centimeter or something like that. So it's an approximation, or it's a statistical property. Even though at the level of our experience, we might experience smoothness as a sort of as a simple quality. It corresponds to this statistical perception of a surface.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on this with some questions. First off, I'm wondering if there's something going on where he's setting up the problematic here, and later whether he's going to provide an argument against this notion that he's setting up here, or whether he's going to continue, because I don't know whether he's going to continue with this more quantitative perspective. And my critique is, of course, that the situatedness that Simondon finds himself in time and his milieu is causing him to reinforce his philosophical perspective with these mathematical notions, particularly the gaze of statistics. And here we have a compelling argument to minimize qualia, and this opens up kind of a set of problems. I can't really go into all of them, but one of them would be the fact that there is this sort of scale problem and the equivocation of various human experiences with technique. He makes these jumps, the comparative examples, going from, to me they seem problematic. I mean, going from the coarse distinctions, looking at polish and various other qualities, to seeing how Descartes may have follow the same line of reasoning. So, I mean, I'm vaguely discussing some of the problems. I can't really articulate the details so much, but there have been a couple of these types of leaps so far, and these are sort of kind of philosophical moves of discourse, or ways of writing, but the logic is inherent in that process. So that's one critique that I'm trying to articulate here. And then, the other one is, of course, that the utility that we see in trying to quantify and account for the fact that certain quality of experience can be quantified. And so he's pointing out that maybe he's trying to draw a distinction between the subjectivity and the objectivity of things, but the gaze of statistics, I think, is something that could be a problem.
I'm not really sure that I understand exactly the issue. I think when he's talking about the qualities here, he's not saying that the qualities are not real or something like that. It's a I guess there's the correlation between these qualities in the at a certain order of magnitude, and then statistical properties of the object in the at another order of magnitude, at a much smaller order of magnitude, like in the example of a smooth or a rough surface. So what appears at one level of magnitude as a simple quality is at another level of magnitude is a statistical property of a surface, or something like that. So it's not that smoothness and roughness are not real or something along those lines. It's that they're relative to a certain order of magnitude, and I think that would be the case for anything that we would want to describe as a quality. So any quality is relative to an order of magnitude, I think is the general takeaway here.
I guess I need to better understand the use, or what you mean by magnitude here, because it seems like it's moving across or transcending more than one category, where it's not just quantity, but there's magnitude as it relates to quality. I think that the statistical account of some perceptive qualities, though, because of its approximate nature, it could also be argued that it's optimizing, or it's limiting, or it will discern for certain patterns, and that could actually dull, if taken for an equivocation, can dull the idea of perception, even intuition.
I think I agree with Angus. We should do the next paragraph. But my take on that, Ayan, if I understand what you're saying, is just what we were discussing in chat, that I don't think he's positing some kind of autonomous, like there are some objective reality to the statistics in and of themselves or anything. I think he's saying there's a way that, like, what we experience in as qualia is not actually this non-localizable feature of matter that can't be explained or something, but that we do the Bergson stuff together, and the way I was thinking about it in chat is like, for Bergson, matter presents itself to perception insofar as it can be acted upon, so there's a way in which perceiving it through the halts and halting it in a way which might not actually be true to its full duration or whatever is actually, it's not like an elusive or illusionary way of looking at it. It's necessary for us to act upon it. So you're not adding on to the problem, the paralogism you don't want to fall into is always end up accidentally ending up talking about matter or things in a way where you're once again applying things on top of them, and they're either real or irreal, like you're applying a secondary order of reality on them rather than something that kind of like develops naturally, I suppose, or is immanent within them. So, and I think the challenge with both Bergson and Simonden is, like, in this case, that's where thinking transductively comes from, right? To, like, because I think the error would be stopping at the statistical level and thinking, yep, that's all it is. This is what it, either in a hyper, like, scientific realist sense, or in an abstract idealist sense, like with the Berkeley that Bergson criticizes, of, well, this is why it's all idea and there is no such thing as matter, whatever it might be. So it's there is that reality, but it's only because it operates. There's like a mesh, like I guess, like he's saying, like that. Our experience of the smoothness, like non-manifest said, is itself just like that's the smoothness of this mesh that is actually a result of these other singularities and whatever. So, yeah, I don't think it's not that you stop at the statistical layer and you just say, yeah, it's all numbers, really. I don't think that's what he's saying. It's that there's a certain kind of, our understanding, our knowledge of information in that way is really just an expectation of consistency of effects. And if you keep going further, then you can say, okay, well, that's where these effects come from. That's how I'm processing it. But sorry, I do think we should continue.
Yeah, I think we can continue to the next subsection just to keep things moving along a little bit. So if someone else would like to read the next bit. The next paragraph here.
It can thus be asserted that the technical operation reveals and utilizes already existing material forms, and moreover constitutes them from other forms on a scale larger than implicit natural forms work upon. The technical operation integrates implicit forms rather than imposing a totally new and foreign form on a matter that would remain passive vis-a-vis this form. Technical form taking is not an absolute genesis of Hyxidity. The Hyxidity of the technical object is preceded and supported by several layers of natural Hyxidity that it systematizes, reveals, and clarifies, and that co-modulate the operation of form taking. This is why it can be supposed that the first types of matter elaborated by humans were not absolutely raw matter, but matter already structured on the scale of human tools and human hands. Plant and animal products, already structured and specialized by their vital functions, like skin, bone, bark, the supple wood of the branch, and flexible vines, were certainly used rather than absolutely raw matter. These seemingly first matters are the vestiges of a living Hyxidity, and this is why they are already present themselves to the technical operation as elaborated, and whereby all that remains for the operation is to accommodate them. The Roman water skin is a goat skin sewn at the extremities of the legs and neck, but still conserves the aspect of the animal's body. This also applies for the tortoise shell of the lyre, or the skull of the bull still bearing horns, which is used to support the bar to which the strings of the primitive musical instrument are fastened. The tree could be modeled while it was still alive, while it would grow by developing according to a direction given to it. This can be seen with the bed of Ulysses, which is made from an olive tree whose branches Ulysses bends to the ground while the tree was still young. Having become large, the tree dies, and Ulysses, without uprooting it, makes it into the frame for his bed, constructing the room around the place where the tree had grown. Here, the technical operation accommodates the living form, and partially diverts the latter for its own benefit by leaving the care of completing the positive work of growth to the spontaneity of life. Furthermore, the distinction between form and matter certainly does not result from pastoral or agricultural techniques, but instead from certain limited artisanal operations, like those of ceramics and the fabrication of bricks from clay. Metallurgy does not fully allow us to think by means of the hylomorphic schema, since the raw material, which is rarely in the pure natural state, must pass through a series of intermediary states before receiving the form properly speaking. After it has received a definite contour, it is still submitted to a series of transformations that add qualities to it, tempering, for example. In this case, the form taking is not visibly carried out in a single instant, but in several successive operations. We cannot strictly distinguish form taking from qualitative transformation. The forging and tempering of a steel ingot are anterior for the former and posterior for the latter, to what could be called form-taking properly speaking. Forging and tempering are nevertheless constitutions of objects. Only the dominance of techniques applied to types of matter made plastic through preparation can guarantee the hylomorphic schema a semblance of explanatory universality, since this plasticity suspends the action of the historical singularities carried by the matter, but this involves a borderline case that conceals the singular action of information in the genesis of the individual.
So again, he's relativizing here the application of the hylomorphic schema. So it's only these types of technical operations like pottery and creating bricks and so on that gives rise to this hylomorphic schema, because the preparation of the matter in this case serves precisely to eliminate these singularities that existed in the matter beforehand, whereas in other technical operations you have to rely on those singularities and incorporate them into the technical object. So like the case of the tree bed thing is the probably the best example of this. So I'm not sure if this was ever like a really practiced technique or if it's just something from Homer, but the idea that you could model a tree to grow into a certain form and then use that form as the frame of a bed. I think it's in principle it's something that would be possible, but probably not worthwhile in real life, I would guess.
So kind of like lots of things I wanted to say, but I almost forgot. But the thing is that at the end of the day, like it's kind of the meta. The Simondon is trying to like explain the form, meta, and then operation, and then everything. So at the end of the day, like the plurality. So in terms of operation, by bringing like crystal as an example, he explained like there could be more than one operation, and then likewise, in terms of meta, just like which is like which was just read. That part also explains like in terms of meta, there could be like more than I mean multiple barriers which could influences like the diversity of meta. So by doing that, Aristotelian hylomorphism can explain this plurality and then diversity, the multiplicity of the Hexary. So the even though like it seems apparently it's kind of really complex. I mean complicated, like the chapters we have read so far, but if we want to simplify, what Simon wants to say is like a multiplicity or plurality or the diversity comes from like kind of like a multiple interweaving like of the all kind of different form, different meta, different operations all together. But my question regarding this all things is like a subject. Is there anybody who remember like which is there anybody who remember the part proprietor, not artisan, get Hexary, something like that? I mean, differentiate or identify Hexary. So in that sense, like I was wondering, like who recognizes, who identifies Hexary, the subject, which one is subject? Like in this kind of all operations, in this kind of like the combination of form and matter, which one is subject of the Hexary?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think in the examples that he's giving here, the subject that is able to recognize the Hyxidity is something like an artisan, because he's always talking about the technical operation as revealing the implicit forms of the matter. So in the case we have the woodworking example where he talks about how in woodworking you receive the feedback from the wood that provides the information or that modulates the action based on the information contained in the singularities of the wood. And then again, in the metalworking example, it would be something like the artisan or the metal worker who operates on the metal and puts it into the mold and tempers it and so on. That person is the one who would have the that would have the experience that corresponds to the Hyxidity in each case. So I think it's always going to be the person who works on the object who is going to have the requisite experience to grasp these different levels of Hyxidity. I was just going to say that's part of his criticism of the hylomorphic schema is that because it's outside of these handful of limit cases like the ceramics and brick making. Outside of those cases, it doesn't correspond to this experience of the technical operation. It doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you the experience that allows you to grasp those Hyxidities in other technical operations.
Thank you for a good explanation. But still, like I can't totally understand like the part, cause like I wish I could find the exact part, but the proprietor, according to this book, according to that part, like for example, autism, would not be like a person. I mean, the subject or agent of the whole maybe like the agent operation, but not the tree. I mean, the proprietor of the tree or crystal. If we move to like the further part, like individuation, something like that, then you can think this one further. But the thing is that here, the which one is like the whole the subject of all hexary singularity. So I think like for example, if we think this one put in the individual human being, like then in that case we can think more clearly, I guess. Like for example, like each human being, if you think that is a kind of like a proprietor of the whole operation, not the whole operation, like a tree or crystal or brick, the proprietor of the whole thing. I think that's kind of an issue still. So I can get it still. Like I can get myself like a totally like understood. And then second thing is that sorry, I should stop here. I'll think about that more and then I'll ask again. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You can take your time to formulate your question or comment. In connection with that first one, I think maybe the passage you're thinking of, or maybe I'm wrong, but I think the passage you're thinking of is where he talks about how the brick making example, the use of the hylomorphic schema in that example corresponds to the slave owner's social role. So the slave owner buys a bunch of clay or I don't know, gets it from his own property or something, and then orders his slaves to produce a certain number of bricks out of it, but he doesn't actually perform the operation of preparing the clay and putting it in the mold and pressing it and so on. And so for him, for the slave owner, his position or his relationship to the technical operation is just an external one where he has an idea of what the form should be, and it should be imposed on this matter, and that he doesn't have any experience of that operation of form taking. So that contrasts with the other examples that he's describing here in this chapter, or this section, I should say, where the artisan does have that experience of the form taking, so that their grasp of the technical operation is at the level of the singularities. So the singularities are what guide the technical operation, rather than being eliminated, like in the case of the hylomorphic schema. So I'm not sure if that's exactly the passage you were thinking of, but I think that's the distinction between this external relationship to the technical operation and the experiential relationship that the artisan has. I think that's sort of the key of in understanding what's going on in this passage. Yeah, I think we can go on just so we don't get sort of bogged down too much, but we can come back to these same concepts as we continue, because he's going to keep talking about the hylomorphic schema and so on. Let's see if someone else could read.
So hylomorphic ambivalence. Under these conditions, we can pose the question concerning what the attribution of the principle of individuation to matter rather than to form depends on. In the hylomorphic schema, individuation through matter corresponds to this characteristic of an obstacle or a limit, which is matter in its technical operation. What makes one object different from another is the set of particular limits, varying from one case to another, that guarantee that this object possesses its Hyxidity. The experience of the recommencement of the construction of objects coming out of the technical operation is what gives the impression of attributing to matter the differences that guarantee that one object is individually distinct from another. Matter is what is conserved in an object. What makes it such that the object is itself is the fact that the state of its matter at any moment summarizes all the events that this object has undergone. Form, which is merely a fabricating intention, a voluntary arrangement, can neither age nor become. It is always the same, from one fabrication to another. It is at least the same qua intention for the consciousness of the one who thinks and gives the order of fabrication. It is the same abstractly for the one who controls the fabrication of 1,000 bricks. He wants them all to be identical, of the same dimension, and according to the same geometrical figure. Whence results the fact that, when the one who thinks is not the one who works, there is in reality nothing in his thought except a single form for all the objects of the same collection. The form is generic, not logically or physically, but socially. A single order is given for all the bricks of the same type. This order consequently cannot differentiate the bricks effectively molded after fabrication into distinct individuals. The same does not apply when one thinks the operation from the point of view of the one who carries it out. A specific brick is different from another specific brick, not just according to the matter required to make it. If the matter has been suitably prepared, it can be homogeneous enough not to spontaneously introduce notable differences between successive moldings, but also and above all, according to the unique nature of the unfolding of the molding operation. The worker's gestures are never exactly the same. The schema is perhaps a single schema from the start of the labor until the end, but each molding is directed by a set of particular psychical, perceptive, and somatic events. The veritable form, the one that directs the arrangement of the mold, the paste, and the regime of successive gestures change from one copy to the other, like so many possible variations of the same theme. Fatigue, as well as the overall state of perception and of representation, intervene in this particular operation, which is equivalent to a singular existence of a particular form for each act of fabrication, thereby translating into the reality of the object, the singularity, the principle of individuation, would then be in the information.
So here he's talking about that difference of perspective that I was just describing, the difference between the internal perspective and the external one. So the external perspective is the perspective of the person who gives the order for 1,000 bricks or whatever it is, and for them they have one single form in mind in their intellectual representation of what they are ordering. It has the same form, and what would individuate one brick from another is just the matter that makes it up. But then from the perspective of the person who actually is making those bricks, the operation of form taking is going to be slightly different each time, and especially over the course of a day or several hours or whatever it is, the fatigue is going to intervene so that you are maybe a little less precise and a little less forceful in pushing the clay into the mold and so on. So each brick is going to be slightly different from each other brick because the actual gesture of form taking is going to be slightly different each time. The formed brick that results from the form taking operation, it will contain the singularities not only of the matter but also of the form taking gesture, the gesture that imposes the form onto the matter. Yeah, it's going to be the form taking operation that individuates one from another rather than just the matter. Yeah, I think that line that the generality is not logical but social. I think that's a really good line. Sorry, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Here, like the form taking, in terms of form taking, or different kind of matter or different kind of operation. Like, for example, like a brick or crystal, even though like apparently it's like just one kind of a break, one kind of crystal, but which is not actually. So what makes all kind of different things take a different form or different forms. So pre-individuality, like which will come later, so or potential. So for example, like each individual or each brick or each wood, each tree or each crystal would have a different potential, different pre-individuality. They could like take a different event, different like operation, something. Could it be right understanding? Could it be right interpretation?
Yeah, I think that's along the right lines. I think I think what ultimately accounts for the individuality of a brick is or individuality of any individual. What accounts for it is the process of individuation, and so it's that process in each case that that produces an individual, and so the form taking operation or the individuation operation in each case is singular. It has the different singularities in terms of like in the case of the brick, you have the properties of the clay that are going to be different each time, and the gesture of imposing the form onto the clay through the mold is going to be different each time. So the individuation of the brick is the result of the operation of individuation, and I think, and again, this is going to be different in each form of individuation or each type of individuation, because we have, as we'll get to later on, we'll have vital individuation and psychic and collective individuation. Each type of individuation brings about the individuation of individuals in a different way. Like as he's already mentioned, sort of in passing, in vital individuation, there's a continuous individuation through time, as opposed to the technical individuation that we've been discussing so far. An active form taking that takes place at a certain time, and then the formed individual can only degrade from there. So there's a difference in the different types of individuation are going to produce different types of individual as well.
Then what's the information here?
Sure. So there's a note 15, and it says the mold is a device dispositive for producing an information that is always the same for each molding. So the information is like the relation of like the mold or like the copy machine itself, and it's like that relation between information is this kind of thing that exists between them as a singularity, but then the individual copy isn't actually a copy, it's an impression, something that's always different, that takes different forms based on the particularities of its Hyxicities.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the information is the particularity of the form taking operation or of the individuation operation more generally. So there's in each process of individuation, there's a particularity to that process that brings about the individuality of the resulting individual. But yeah, we'll see.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in because I was typing out a question just as you're giving this great answer. So is that also Hyxidity? Like, is Hyxidity the end of a process where so singularities get organized through a form taking process, and then at the end of that process, you wind up with something that can be said to have Hyxidity in compared to the other things that are being produced, say, from the mold or from the form. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that sounds right to me. So Hyxidity is the result of a process of individuation, and the singularity is what is the sort of starting point that around which the process of individuation forms in its particular way. And so information in general is the property of having these singularities, which which can be sort of inherited by the result of the process. So you can have a singularity like the action of the wind on a tree will cause it to grow in a certain direction, and the resulting tree will have its branches, and the grain of the wood will be formed in a certain direction. And so the information is inherited through the process of individuation, through the lifespan of the tree. It's inherited by the wood that results after the tree is cut down. So yeah, we have these three sort of correlated terms of singularity, information, and Hyxidity.
Wouldn't the one issue be that if we adjust, because I agree, I think this all makes sense, but then if we say, well, Hexary is the result of this, that you can kind of once again end up speaking about it in terms of almost individuals, whereas it seems like this is why all the different kinds of language uses complements itself, because I think Ali or someone had mentioned that, you know, the idea of potentials in pre-individual states, like what is the Hexary that's developed isn't, I guess, unless we go back to the brick example where he's like, there is a point in the unmolding when all the energy has been expended and heat is lost, and now it is this thing. Like if it's like the crystal or if it's anything else, even the wood, like presumably the Hexary isn't like finished, right? That the Hexary is like a particular system state that is its thisness, right? Because if it was finished, then it could just be, you could just kind of end up talking about all these different components as sort of formed individuals acting upon each other. But that line that I keep going back to, the Hexary of the technical object is preceded and supported by several layers of natural Hexary that it systematizes, reveals, clarifies, that co-modulate the operation of form taking. That, again, I don't know if I'm wrong here, but it seems like there has to be some kind of potentials that are not fully exhausted at any layer of Hexary in order for it to continue, be able to keep individuating, I guess, if that makes sense.
As far as I understand, the Simondong's idea is like the the continuous genesis. Sorry, so the continuous genesis of a Hexary, that's a key point of Simondong's idea, I think, and also we overlapping, coexisting things all together. So information doesn't end, and then it also like instigate like another procedural again, and then it's kind of like a never-ending circular or spiral. I'm not sure which one is the right one, but never-ending process is like made like through this whole process. And then my question is, my understanding is like a Hexary is like almost like a singularity. Is there any differentiation between Hexary and the singularity?
So I think, I think Alyosha, you're right to emphasize again that the results of a process of individuation is always a provisional result, or it never exhausts the potentials that are contained in the system as a whole. And so when I say that Hyxidity is the results of a process of individuation, that's always going to be a relative result. And I think, Ali, to answer your question, I think that the difference, or I think Hyxidity and singularity, I think they have to do with the relationship to a process of individuation. So the same thing would be either a singularity or a Hyxidity, depending on which role it's playing in a process of individuation. So if it's acting as the information that structures the process of individuation, then that's a singularity. Whereas if it's the result, if you're considering it as the result of a process of individuation, then you treat it as a Hyxidity. So the singularity, the same features of the entity in question can either be counted as a singularity if they are structuring a process of individuation, or you can count them as a Hyxidity if you're treating them as the result of a process of individuation. But the same feature can play both roles in different processes of individuation. That's as far as I understand it.
I hadn't thought of it in that way, but can I ask, Non, would it make sense though to think like, because you can have several singularities that couldn't they together kind of define the hexaity of a particular layer, like whatever degree you're talking about in those 3 or 100 degrees that he gave as examples, or could be potential examples, like because earlier when he describes, and I don't know if we're going to get differences between parasitic and real singularities and all this stuff, but some of the examples of singularities that he's brought up so far were like the knots in the wood, in the brick. We talked about like the pebbles and the air pockets and these kinds of things around which things form. And we know that the crystal seed is kind of the prototypical example of a singularity that is needed in order for the structuration to happen. Whereas, because I actually like what you're saying, because in a way it is perspectival is the wrong word, but it's like sort of depending on at what point you're stitching in the procedure, you can call it this thing or the other thing. But then it almost struck me, and I don't know if I'm wrong here, that hexaity would be like, all of if you're looking at this piece of wood, it's like all of these singularities taken together at this layer of the technical operation define its hexaity as smooth or as elastic or as this thing. So I mean, maybe they kind of bleed into each other, but I kind of thought of it as like singularity doesn't just mean one thing, because they're always plural, but that hexaity was more of like the state, I don't know, a system state, but I might be off there.
I just thought like who made the terms. For example, like hexaity was coined by like Duns Scotus and then Deleuze, like the word, things like that. So I just like simply thought like that's kind of a preference of the thinker.
Yeah, that definitely is a Duns Scotus's term that Simondon is taking up here, and I think he makes that explicit reference right at the beginning of the book, if I remember correctly, which is kind of rare for him. He often just doesn't cite his sources, which is kind of infuriating sometimes. But so yeah, the sort of basic meaning of hexaity outside of Simondon's works, but in the more general philosophical usage, is the thisness of something. So what is it that makes it what it is, that makes it this particular entity that it is, and for Simondon, that thisness has to do with the process of individuation from which it results, so that it's always relative to a process of individuation, and I think that's something sort of a key idea to keep in mind throughout the rest of the book. But yeah, I think there were some comments in the chat about we should finish this paragraph before we end, because we're almost at time. So yes, let's do that. I can read the last bit of this paragraph. Where are we? I think we ended at the singularity, the principle of individuation would then be in the information. One could say that in a civilization that divides humans into two groups, those who give orders and those who carry them out, the principle of individuation. The principle of individuation, in line with the technological example, is necessarily attributed either to the form or the matter, but never to both together. The one who gives orders to be carried out does not accomplish them and only controls the result, is one who has a tendency to find the principle of individuation in the matter, the source of quantity and plurality, because this person does not experience the rebirth of a new and particular form in each fabricating operation. Thus, Plato considers that when the weaver has broken a shuttle, he fabricates a new shuttle not by fixing the eyes of the body on the pieces of the broken shuttle, but by contemplating with the mind's eye the form of the ideal shuttle which he already finds within himself. Archetypes are unique for each type of beings. There is a single ideal shuttle for all sensible shuttles, past, present, and future. On the contrary, the one who carries out the labor does not see in the matter a sufficient principle of individuation, because for him matter is prepared matter, whereas it is raw matter for the one who gives orders without working, since he does not prepare it himself. However, the prepared matter is precisely what is by definition homogeneous, since it must be capable of taking form. Therefore, the necessity of renewing the effort of labor in each new unit is what introduces a difference between successively prepared objects for the man who works. In the temporal series of the day's efforts, each unit is inscribed as its own instant. The brick is the fruit of this effort, of this trembling or resolute, hasty or weary action. The brick carries with it the imprint of a moment of the man's existence. It solidifies this activity exerted upon homogeneous passive matter, waiting to be worked. It emerges from this singularity.
Here it almost seems to me like we're seeing singularity, because we've been thinking about the micro, like molecular way of talking about it, but he's also describing like the entire context of the artisan carrying out his work. I mean, I know there's subtleties to it, but he's saying that I think he's describing that as a singularity as well, which seems to correspond with what you were saying, not about like the wind and the tree. So singularity is almost like, if we think about singularity corresponding almost more to the idea of information, in that it informs and conditions the structuration or individuation of something, that might introduce a small distinction, if at all, to like between that and the word of hexady.
Earlier on, doesn't he say that the singularity is, or he calls the mold the singularity in the brick making operation, right? Is this distinction he's making here the one between the two different forms of hylomorphism that he talks about in the introduction, the matter-oriented one and the form-oriented?
Right. Yeah, he does point to this issue within hylomorphism. So yeah, in the introduction, he talks about the atomistic or substantialist theory and the hylomorphic theory, and then he says within the hylomorphic theory, you have these two opposing positions as to which side of the schema is the one that accounts for individuation. Is it the matter that individuates the form, or is it the form that individuates the matter? So here we see the social roots of that distinction within the hylomorphic schema. I would say that it's probably not a good idea to just sort of push through, just because I want to leave time for discussion. It is a little bit. I would have liked to have finished this subsection today, but I think it's better to pick up next time from here, so that we have time to discuss these sections, these couple paragraphs. So yeah, I would say we should probably leave it here. So thank you everyone for your comments and questions and so on. And thank you also for patience with some growing pains of the new system, the new organization of the server. But I think it went pretty well today. I have to remember to shut down the bot as well. I'll see everyone next week.